Greetings all. It is February 2nd, 2023. There's one other thing I want to be on the record for here. I have stated it elsewhere in the past, but not here. What I am going to say will sound crazy to many people, but it's absolutely true. And it'll sound crazy to people because the implications are so significant and profound. And it is this, that if humanity was functioning rationally and objectively, we would shut down industrial civilization immediately, suspending all activities that are significantly harmful to the environment until we devised ways and means of maintaining civilization without continuing to destroy the environment. Now, obviously, that has epically gigantic implications. And a lot of people would stop and think, well, wait a minute, what does that mean? And I'm saying it means everything. Because the alternative extreme is that we carry on the path that we're currently on, which will be, if it won't regardless, a dire threat to civilization itself. Currently, we're kind of trying to re-engineer our societies so that we can carry on with business as usual, simply replacing a lot of our highly polluting technologies with ones that are less highly polluting, and hoping for the best, with minimal disruption to current levels of lifestyle and convenience, at least in so-called developed countries. We are already on track to hit at least 2 degrees of global warming around mid-century, and it won't stop there. As I've said before, the great concern is that we trigger positive feedback loops, which will create a self-reinforcing scenario where we won't be able to slow it down anymore, at least for a very lengthy period of time. Civilization is already straining from the impacts. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the science because you can go read about this for the next 3 years if you want to. That's not my point. My point is just that, as crazy as that sounds, my statement about shutting down industrial civilization, I have a very high degree of confidence that within a few decades, people will be looking back and saying, why didn't we shut down civilization? I myself stated well over a decade ago, if not 2 decades ago, publicly, that we should have declared a global state of emergency. Now, very few people will say that. Very few people are willing to say that. A lot of scientists, I'm sure, think that, but they don't want to state it because they will be perceived as being alarmist. And part of the problem is that if you freak people out too much, they go into denial or panic or fatalism, and then you're stymied. You can't move forward. There's already a lot of people who are in denial about this, and they fear that, we don't want to trigger counter-reaction. And of course, business interests and stakeholders would go into fierce resistance over something like this. And they are very powerful and influential and wealthy. And they're also willing to use very underhanded methods to take down their opponents. I mean, there are entire countries which are dependent on fossil fuels for their income. We're talking about having trillions of dollars worth of lost or stranded assets. It would be almost like declaring war to state that we need to shut everything down, even though that is exactly what we should do. But I will stand by what I said, because you have to project 2 or 3 decades down the line to really understand why that would make sense as opposed to what we will probably do. No politician would be willing to say something like that for very obvious reasons. You can't, most people do not want to hear that everything has to just stop. That would not be popular at all, would it? And what I mean by shutting down industrial civilization is I mean we would just go into kind of a period of stasis where we provide critical support for everybody. We maintain all critical services like fire, healthcare, food supply, and all that, but we stop producing goods that aren't mission critical. And we would give the earth some number of decades to hopefully rebalance. Meanwhile, we are developing alternative forms of energy that are non-polluting as much as possible while in this holding pattern. And over time, we would gradually start reintroducing activities as the global environment could accommodate them without further significant damage. Even though things like electric vehicles produce far less pollution when you're using them, it takes a phenomenal amount of energy to mine and extract all the raw materials, to fabricate them, to ship them. There's no way we're going to have hundreds of millions of electric vehicles driving around without massive environmental impacts. There's no way, in other words, that we can maintain the lifestyle that people are familiar with on a global scale, and many countries are developing, and so they are on a per capita basis or per person basis using and consuming a lot more energy and materials and goods than they used to. We cannot have billions of people living like Americans and have a habitable biosphere at the same time based on current technology. I don't care what anybody tells you. Look at what's happening in the US West. I mean, we have dramatically altered weather patterns around the world. I could go on and on. There is no way to get from here to there and keep the planet below a threshold that is safe. And on top of everything else, human beings seem to be wired to not want to hear these kinds of things, and the algorithms that feed them information are thus similarly inclined. There is a significant bias against reality, in other words. Back in 2012, Republican Senator James Inoff, who became a notorious climate change denier, was interviewed on the Rachel Maddow show. He was the ranking Republican on the Environment and Public Works Committee. Maddow was talking to him about climate and his peculiar position, and he stated, quote, "I was actually on your side of this issue when I was chairing the committee and first heard about this. I thought it must be true until I found out what it would cost." End quote. In other words, one of the most notorious Republican climate change deniers didn't question the science until he found out what it was going to cost to rectify the problem. It was all about money and not about the long-term security and viability of the nation. I recall that episode quite clearly because it made the news in climate circles, and I was very involved at that time. And to most of us, it was jaw-dropping because of his antics on the topic. So anyway, I'm on the record. Mark my words. We will very likely significantly regret not taking drastic action in the recent past or even now.